Hello, and welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we aim to bring back civil discourse to the political sphere and the subjects that matter most to you. From Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
So, Jesse, what's on the menu for tonight?
There's plenty for us to talk about, but one thing that I know you and I have been wanting to talk about and care very deeply about is this issue over parenting, per se. It's not even really parenting. It is like whether you are a parent or you're not a parent, which apparently is a big issue to certain factions of this country. And so I was interested in the recent kind of back and forth between Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Kamala Harris. So for those of you who haven't heard about this, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she's the former press secretary for Donald Trump, the Trump administration. She is the daughter of Mike Huckabee, former presidential candidate, Iowa caucus winner, kind of hard right conservative guy, and former governor of Arkansas, which is now the position that she holds as the first female governor of Arkansas. So Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders recently said in a campaign event that her children keep her humble, and as such, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble. And that was clearly a jab at the fact that Harris doesn't have biological children, despite the fact that she has two stepchildren with her husband, Doug Emhoff. That settled for a couple of days. There was plenty of talk about it on social media, but Harris responded by saying that I don't think she understands that there are a lot of women out here who, one, are not aspiring to be humble. Two, a whole lot of women have a lot of love in their life, family in their life, and I think it's really important for women to lift each other up, end quote. So I find that to be a very strong response. She essentially said it's not the 1950s anymore, but it does bring to the surface this issue that we keep seeing that has kind of repeatedly been thrown into the political discourse since Kamala Harris took over at the top of the ticket for the Democrats, which is, are people who do not have children, biological children specifically, but children in general, are they less invested in the future of the country? This has been brought to the surface with J.D. Vance's now infamous childless cat lady's comment, among several others. So I'm curious, Tyler, as a new parent, what are your views on this rhetoric, and do you think that you have more of a stake in the future of the country than someone who is not a parent?
Being a parent does not make you any smarter, wiser, or more insightful than any person in your community. Doesn't make you a better person than your neighbor, doesn't make you a better person than your sibling, doesn't make you a better person than your competitor. The act of becoming a parent, yes, there are changes that happen to you biologically in some cases, mentally in most cases, but it does not make you better. There are good parents and there are bad parents. There are good people and there are bad people. Being a parent doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't make you someone who can suddenly understand the right decision to make. And this is politically and non-politically. Staying on topic of politics here, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you understand how you should vote and that vote is suddenly more valid because you have some sort of burst of wisdom that came because you had a child. It's not true. Are you different? Yeah, totally. But that being a parent doesn't make you any better or lesser of a person than you were beforehand. So the notion that J.D. Vance and many other individuals, Sarah Huckabee Sanders and other people, especially on the right, say that parents somehow are these better people, it's political bull. This is bigger than just parents having more sway in elections or something, right? This is part of this greater push to return back to a point in time where the nuclear family was everything, right? That's really what this is all about. That's why they're saying these things. Because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. Any parent will tell you that doesn't make any sense. Yes, can your children humble you? Absolutely, they can humble you. Absolutely. My kid humbles me. Definitely. But it doesn't mean that nothing humbles you. doesn't mean that you cannot be humbled amid the absence of a child. You could be humbled by anything. This really goes back to this broader attempt to return back or strive to return back to this era in American society to, especially the conservative movement, preserve what they used to see as the ideal familial archetype. That's my belief, at least. I think it's very apparent in the language that a lot of these politicians are using, especially now on the campaign trail. I think J.D. Vance is the pinnacle of this. If Republicans were trying to get away from this, then J.D. Vance is their worst enemy, because he is the torchbearer of the return to the 50s, return to the nuclear family. And I want to bring up a few things that, he said on various occasions, some of which are a little bit more well-known than others, that highlight this. On the topic of taxation, he was on Charlie Kirk's show. He says, and I quote, "We need to punish the things we think are bad and reward the things we think are good. Let's tax the things that are bad and not tax the things that are good. You should be paying a lower tax rate if you have 3 kids than if you have no kids." And so when you connect the dots, what's he saying here? He's saying, in this example, having 3 kids, you should be taxed less as a parent, and that is good. And having no kids, you should be taxed more, and thus are bad. Those are the dots he's connecting here. On a separate occasion, he says, let's give votes to all children and allow those votes to be controlled by their parents, which blows my mind, right? Because, again, as a parent, that makes no sense. Why does that give me more authority to vote in an election? Because, again, that goes back to this concept that somehow parents can make better decisions, broadly speaking, than non-parents, which is not true. I can say, as a parent, I can say, yeah, dude, totally not true. Like, being a parent doesn't make you wiser. It doesn't make you more politically sound, or politically intelligent. But I think something that everyone can have a say on, because everyone has had a parent, is that parents aren't wholly good people always. Being a parent doesn't mean you are just going to be a good person, because there are bad parents. And I think everyone...
A lot of them.
Yes,
there are a lot of bad parents.
There are a lot of bad parents.
Because it's really freaking hard. It is a really hard thing to do. And it, as much as you say, okay, there are natural instincts and all of that, like, this is why I tip my cap to you as, a very good parent, and somebody who obviously I think, should be bringing, a young person up into the world. Like, it is a tough job that requires a certain skill set. Good people make better parents, typically. So, that's just kind of the crossover. But you're right, it's not necessarily true that just becoming a parent makes you a better person. That's not always true. And in fact, becoming a parent sometimes makes people worse people. It makes them more stressed. It brings out the worst in them. Then that's
absolutely.
when we start getting into, abusive or neglectful, homes, which, unfortunately, it has always existed in humanity and continues to exist in our society to this day.
Right. When I listen to J.D. Vance's rhetoric on this, specifically this extra vote rhetoric, I'm thinking, listen, I have friends, close friends of mine, who have had parents that are unfortunately been addicted to drugs, parents that have neglected, that have beaten, that have abused, and been overall terrible, terrible people, either by choice or by the unfortunate effect of addiction and other societal issues. Is he saying these people, because they're a parent, they should get an extra vote? That they're somehow allowed to have the vote? What happens when that kid grows up? Is it when they're 18, the vote gets taken away from them and they get one vote again? They're still parent. It makes no sense. The point is, it makes no sense. Intentionally makes no sense, because that's not the point. The point isn't, oh yeah, parents, they're great. There's a deeper thing here, because then you go into the negative stuff that he says, comments of people having no children, having no commitment to the future of this country, right? You mentioned that earlier. Something that I think is particularly interesting and something that's a bit lesser known, and I'm kind of excited to talk about this, as it is also in my field. J.D. Vance has this other lesser known viewpoint within the Family and Medical Leave Act. He has, in the past, and continues to champion closing this specific loophole in the FMLA policy. Right now, women who take FMLA bonding leave, after having a child, you can take bonding leave, whether you're father or the mother, to bond with your child. Typically, you take anywhere between 2 weeks to 4 months, sometimes longer. The idea is that you then are allowed to return back to work with no negative impact to your job, right? They can't replace you. They can't fire you in the middle of this. They can't negatively impact you, right? You just get to return to your job as if nothing happened after this protected leave. Now, while you do this, of course, you're still paying your premiums, right? Because you still have to pay into insurance, which then covers the cost of childbirth process and medical appointments, all these things, right? Now, there is a loophole that says if you were to leave your employer, right? If you were to not come back from FMLA to your place of employment after going on leave, then your health insurance plan provider has a right to come and collect the premiums that you owe for whatever you have not paid. You're paying a premium, that's what's covering all this medical expenses. JD Vance has said that he wants to close this loophole, meaning he wants to have it so that if you were to never come back to work after going on bonding leave for however long you want, that you would not be owed any premiums. Basically saying like you got all your stuff paid for free and you don't have to pay the premiums, right? Which in a vacuum, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, screw insurance companies, man. I don't want to pay them, right? But here's the thing. He specifically says, and this is his verbiage, he specifically says that he would close a loophole that would allow women from not having to pay premiums who take the bonding leave. Not people, not men and women, not any other gender, specifically women. And I think that's the key indicator here. To me, that shows not that he's trying to be altruistic and and stick it to the man being insurance companies, right? To me, that says he wants to incentivize women to stay home with their kids indefinitely. He's going back to his previous quote. He is rewarding specifically women for not returning back to work after having a child and instead staying there. This would have immense impacts to their ability to seek work again. It's extremely difficult, and I mean immensely difficult, for a woman who has taken a large leave right after having a child to return to the workforce. It happens, but it's very, very difficult. But he's not trying to bring attention to that, because he's trying to say, women, stay home with your kids. Don't go back to work. I'll make it so you don't have to pay your premiums, meaning you got free insurance for that first year in which you had a child. But the idea is that I am now trapping you to staying at home and being a stay-at-home mother. If you want to be a stay-at-home mother, that's great. Fine. I mean, that's awesome. If you can afford to do that, that's wonderful. And if it's something that you want to do, you should do it. But it's not for everybody. Plenty of mothers, my wife, for one, love to go back to work. They want to provide. This push to return back to this period of time, that's the whole goal. And it's deeply unsettling. It's deeply unsettling because, in my opinion, it's misogynistic. In my opinion, it's not respecting people who have fought in this country for years, for decades, to be treated on an equal playing field as everybody else. And I don't want to sit here and say, conservatism is bad. I think that there are positive policies on both sides of the aisle. But when you talk about these like social goals that they have, shaping society in the way they see fit, which is an older way of seeing things, I feel like it is wholly harmful to certain groups in this country and wholly beneficial to other groups in this country. And I personally feel that is not the right way to treat the future of this country. I feel like it's just not the way we should be moving forward. But I've been talking for a while, and I do want to ask you something kind of specific and relevant to this. When you think about the language that JD and other conservative leaders have been using, it feels like the language is meant to make one group feel more important than another group. And that is inherently harmful in nature. I don't feel like these comments are made to make parents feel special. It's more about making non-parents feel like lesser. So when you think about that rhetoric, who is this aimed to hurt when you think about the negativity in a lot of this rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, you've made some great points here, first and foremost. You've already answered one part of that, which is women. In general, it is targeted towards the idea that women's primary purpose on this earth is to reproduce new humans. And that being a mother is inherently their primary usage and purpose within God's plan or whatever it is that they believe. And so it is scary to them how many people are choosing not to have children right now. And they inevitably see that as kind of a break of, as you said, the traditional mold, the traditional family, the nuclear family. And when they also look at it, it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who is very, center-right leaning. He's talked with me about how, and this I think is a fair point, it bothers him that the only young people who are, or the majority of young people right now who are moving towards the Democratic Party are people who are abandoning their parents' beliefs. There are fewer and fewer left-leaning and liberal-minded people who are having children. I, for one, am guilty of this. I am a left-of-center liberal person who is not a parent, does not plan to be a parent, has really no interest in being a parent. I'm happy being Uncle Jesse for the duration of my life. I'm very happy with that. And that's not like I sit there and I'm like, why would anyone want to be a parent? I get to watch my close friends, my family members who are bringing children into the world, and they're going to get to raise these kids and bring them into being these amazing adults like yourself, of course. And I get to be a part of that and get to watch that. But the idea that I don't have a stake in that is really an interesting mentality, isn't it? Because what they are essentially saying is that why would anyone ever care about somebody who isn't their child? Why would anyone ever care about somebody who isn't immediately in their family? And that's the difference between a liberal mindset and a conservative mindset. Conservative mindset, as it is an inherently more selfish mindset. The idea of people, care only about themselves. And it is so foreign to them that someone else on the opposite side could actually care about society as a whole, or care about people who aren't directly like them or part of their inner circle. And as someone who is an educator, it is frustrating to me to hear someone try and take away my stake in the future of this country, because it is literally what I do. I care very much about helping young people grow into being stable, functional members of society, and doing my part as an educator to help them do that in my narrow view. That's not the same as being a parent. In no way am I remotely saying that impact is anything like parenting. But it is an impact, and I feel a great sense of pride in being able to assist my students and mentor young people. And I care very deeply about my students, and I care about their future, and I want to see them succeed, and I want the country to succeed. I care very much about the future of the country and of the world. Let's just be clear about that. And so this mentality that somehow I have less of a stake in the future, is a very strange, kind of simple-minded thing to say. So yes, the first thing, though, to answer your question again, is women who are being hurt by this. And of course, it is labeling as an other people who are on the left side of the political spectrum who are choosing not to have children. Because it is more frequently, much more frequently, liberals right now who are choosing not to have children for a variety of reasons than conservatives. Conservatives, especially religious conservatives, are traditionally, it is just an expectation of society that they will have children, and they tend to have more children than liberals. And even if you look at communities of color that are moving more on the conservative side, especially socially conservative, those tend to be communities that are having large numbers of children as well. So there is a political benefit for the right to demonize people who don't have kids. It's politically beneficial for them to make women seem, again, like they're ignoring their calling in life. Harrison Butker, the kicker of the Chiefs, set everything off earlier this year when he spoke at Occidental College, a historically Catholic college, and said basically that women have been told diabolical lies, I believe was what he said, about, what their priorities should be. Look, there is nothing wrong with a woman who believes and chooses to be, as you said, a stay-at-home mom who values themselves first and foremost as a mother and as a wife or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that decision. And any liberals that would go off and say that that's a bad thing, that making that decision somehow makes you backwards, I think is unfair. And I don't hear that very often, for the record. I hear that very little. There's very few liberals who are actually sitting there wagging the finger at women for wanting to have a family and prioritize having a family. And the odd thing is, if you look at the policies, clearly it's the Democratic Party who is more family friendly. I mean, the Democratic Party, you talk about paid family leave. The only reason we don't have that in this country is because of the Republican Party, because they don't believe in providing social services to any significant extent to people in this country. They view that as a welfare. They believe that it is a step towards becoming a welfare state. It's interesting that all other Western nations have figured this out and we haven't, similarly to how they've all figured out healthcare and we still haven't, and prescription drug price control, and we still haven't. Beyond all of that, the second part that we haven't discussed yet is the demonization of LGBTQ people. And there's a reason why when he talked about childless cat ladies, he mentioned Pete Buttigieg, which was really messed up. Quite frankly, it's disgusting. This idea that somehow LGBTQ parents make the family lesser, and that's really where we get into this whole biological children thing. That's where the difference is. Somehow there is this demonization of people who don't have biological children. And Kamala Harris is the code word for that because, she's a step parent. But really what they're talking about when it comes down to it is LGBTQ parents who don't have a fully biological nuclear family in the traditional sense. And it's sick. It's a really disturbing thing because we have seen very clearly that LGBTQ parents can be amazing parents. They can also be terrible parents, just like the rest of us.
Because get this, they're just people.
They're just people. Shocking. It's immensely frustrating to me that demonization continues, and it is certainly the undercurrent of all this rhetoric. It's disturbing, it's frustrating, but these are the narratives that are out there, and these are the reasons why. And we have to start breaking this down so we can have reasonable discussions, because there is a fear of the nuclear family changing, and it is changing, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that somehow that's going to take away from the value system of Americans. It's really important for us to continue to champion the idea that family doesn't mean one specific thing. And so Kamala Harris, she is a mom. Her stepkids call her Mamala. Think about this. Her husband's ex-wife considers her to be a third parent, came out publicly to defend her about what a great parent she has been to her stepkids. That's remarkable. People are like, oh, well, that's a blended family, as if that's somehow a bad thing. Look, people get divorced. It doesn't always work out that way, where you find, the love of your life and you stay with one person for the rest of humanity. And quite frankly, it shouldn't work that way for a lot of people. It shouldn't. For a lot of people, historically, then when you look back, oh, well, we didn't get divorced. Yeah, because there were people like my grandmother who were miserable. She would never admit it, but she was miserable with her husband for decades and decades and decades. And the minute he passed away, God help him, but the minute he passed away, she took his clothes to the Goodwill. They were gone the next week. And then she started living her life. And the only regret that I have is that she didn't get to live her life sooner than that, because that was the way things were. And so this idea somehow that people should just tough it out in marriages, sure, I do agree that if you're going to commit to marriage, which, is something you've done, something I'm about to do, you can't just up and leave, immediately. There is a point where things devolve and they change. And so this idea that, things were so much better in the past really is a time period in which, men ran around on women and women stayed at home and did everything for men. That's the glorification from this certain people. And again, in some ways, in some families, aspects of that, not the running around in women, but in some aspects of that work for certain people. It's what they want. It's great. If that is what you want as a woman, then that's ideal, and we should support it, and we should try to make sure that that is an option for as many people as want to do that. But it's not going to be an option.
If that is what you're into, that's fine. If you are a part of the trad wife community, if that's your thing, if you want to live that way, that is perfectly okay for you. But it's not okay to go on a platform and say this is the way everybody needs to live. This is the way an entire country, an entire society needs to live. And that's the problem that we're facing right now. Is it's no longer people who are like, I like living this way. I think it's kind of fun. It works for me. That's great. Having 8 kids works for you. I'm glad you have the money to do that. But good Lord, man, let everyone else live the way they want to, and don't demonize them for doing that.
It is funny that the live and let live mantra was, and I live in New Hampshire, live free or die is literally on every license plate. Like, it is the motto of the state. But the live and let live motto for, how we engage and treat each other somehow doesn't apply. It used to be a very conservative principle. That was their argument against liberalism and government overreach. And now they have no issues talking about how families, people who have families and children should matter more in the political spectrum. We should be dictating whether people should be allowed to get divorced. We should be, of course, dictating whether or not whether a woman can make a decision about, whether to have an abortion or not. These are insane things, and it really is an evolution of the conservative movement in this country that is disturbing and that we have to continue to talk about. Yes, there are issues on both sides of the aisle and many, many things. You and I probably both agree there are times when liberals are overstepping their bounds of this live and let live kind of mentality, and maybe going too far in trying to dictate how people live. But it is very clear to me that the biggest threat to the live and let live mentality is on the right at the moment, and that hasn't always been the case. But speaking of which, as we kind of move into things that we can all agree on, I hope everyone agrees with me on this, but the politicization of natural disasters has to stop. In recent days, in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, Trump has said that lands are being confiscated by the Democrats. That is not true. He's saying that people who need aid are only eligible to get $750 in aid. That is not true. And now he's saying that federal aid, of course, it's being redirected to migrants. That is not true. I'm so tired of this. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene has gone off on her tangent saying that Democrats are literally controlling the weather. It would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous and absurd, and if it wasn't taking advantage of a situation in which people lost their lives, people lost their homes, communities have been destroyed, and we're about to see it again. The hurricane that is barreling towards the Florida coast as we speak right now, and by the time that this airs, there likely will be, immense pain and devastation throughout the state. And this is personal to me. My dad lives in Florida in the path of this hurricane. These are serious situations, and I'm so sick and tired of politicians, and recently it has very much been on the right, but not entirely, using these natural disasters as a political football to try and score some points. And it's disgusting. And I want to go back to kind of when this started, because it hasn't always been this way. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 is largely associated with the Bush administration and a terrible response. That is true. All of it is true. The Bush administration had put a guy in charge of FEMA who was George W. Bush's hunting buddy. He had no prior experience running an agency, and he was woefully underprepared. You and I have been to New Orleans together. We've heard a lot of these stories as we were there. The situation was a debacle, but at the same time, it should be noted, the state had a Democratic governor and a Democratic mayor of New Orleans who later would go to prison for financial crimes, both of which did atrocious jobs at handling this disaster as well, and both suffered political consequences for it. Their political careers were essentially over at the end of this. In the aftermath of Katrina, it seemed like Republicans said, well, I guess we can use natural disasters for political points now because it was used against Bush. Well, and they tried it during Hurricane Sandy. In fact, they were angry and they went nuts at Chris Christie a few days before the 2012 election for taking a picture with Barack Obama, shaking his hand, giving him a hug when Barack Obama came to survey the damage. And you got to hand it to Chris Christie. I don't like the guy very much about policy. I've disagreed with him on most anything. I think he's made some major mistakes. But the guy said, I don't give a damn about politics. My state is hurting. And, anyone that wants to help, I will come and allow them to help. We are so far from that point now. It is so terribly sad. Charlie Crist, the former governor of Florida, took one picture in which he hugged Obama in the aftermath of a natural disaster in Florida, and Charlie Crist was basically run out of the Republican Party. He is now a Democrat. Hard to believe, all things considered, in this short span of time. But he was run out of the party just for accepting aid and appreciating the President of the United States giving aid. This has to stop. As this storm comes, you're already seeing DeSantis and Republicans deny aid from FEMA. They're making it more difficult for communities to accept it because they don't want federal overreach or whatever it is. This is ridiculous. We have to stop. And when Trump was president, Hurricane Irma, I believe it was, came through Puerto Rico, and he came with the paper towels. It was a bad optic. It was a bad look. I don't think he gave a shit about the people of Puerto Rico. He certainly didn't give a shit about the people in California when he flew out to California, toured the grounds, and called the city the wrong name. And apparently we're finding out from Bob Woodward's book that he didn't even want to send aid to California because it's a liberal state. That's all despicable. But the aid that happened and what took place in those disasters was not entirely Trump's fault in terms of how the aid, in fact, for the most part, in those disasters came about at the speed that you would expect considering the scale of the disasters. And Democrats did try to use that for some political points, and I don't think that was entirely fair. Overall, in the last 15, 20 years, what you have really seen since Katrina has been politicians on both sides of the aisle, but especially now on the right, trying to take advantage of disasters. And it's sick, it's despicable, and it has to stop. We have to stop rewarding people who do this. What Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying, she should not be allowed to return to Congress. Someone should be able to primary her. I get that you don't want a Democrat, but someone should be able to primary her when she says something like this. So what have you got for us here? Hopefully something a little less depressing.
So I apparently haven't had enough J.D. Vance dunking this episode yet, so I'm going back on there. My things we can all agree on is that everybody, and this is from a parent to parents, support your children's special interests. Please. I don't care if you think it's weird, provided it's not a danger to them, support them. If they are really interested in a show or a game, a YouTube video, watch it. Figure it out. Try to connect with your children. And this is coming from that interview where J.D. Vance was on TV and he, in my opinion, gloated about how when he took the call from Trump, first being asked to become the VP, and he was talking about how his kid wouldn't stop talking to him about Pikachu because he was going through his whole Pokemon phase, and he turns to his kid and goes, "Well, you shut up about Pikachu for 1 second. I'm on the most important call of my life," or something to that fact. And listen, I get snapping at your kid. That happens. I don't think anyone is evil or wrong for accidentally snapping at your kid, especially if it's a very tense and important time for you in your career, as it was for JD in that instance. But he goes on about it, and he's talking about he's proud, oh yeah, some kid was talking about Pikachu, and I was like, shut the hell up, kid. It's Trump. He talked about it like he was so proud of doing that. If that were me, and God forbid I snapped at my kid for doing something like that, I would definitely not be mentioning that on television. I would be ashamed that I said that. So it upset me, It upset me not only as a person who does like Pokemon quite a lot, but also it upset me as a parent who sees that as just another instance of parents who don't care about their children's interests. So listen, I get it's difficult, there's a lot that comes to being a parent, but it means a lot more to kids than you might realize to actually connect with them on something that they find interesting, not something that you find interesting. What they care about is whatever they find out in the universe and they develop an interest in. So if your kid's into Pokemon, man, will it kill you to go on a Wikipedia page, learn a bit, and actually try to bond with something that means something to them?
I could not agree more. I am a theater person. My dad knew nothing about theater, had no interest whatsoever in theater, but got a hint from me constantly wanting to, dress up and pretend to be a pirate or a knight or whatever it was as a kid, or a cowboy. He got a sense that I really, had a knack for performing and fostered that. And I'm forever grateful. It changed my life. The fact that my dad allowed me to pursue something that wasn't in his mindset or wasn't in his expectation for what I would go into. And he fostered that and supported me. And as such, I am literally where I am today because my parents supported my childhood interests. And so could not agree more with you and echo that sentiment. That'll do it for this week on Reunited States. Thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Please follow us. And as always, you can access Reunited States wherever you get your podcasts. And please continue to focus on reasonable, rational discourse, bridging the divides in our society, not tearing bridges down. Don't burn them, build them. So from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig. And this has been Reunited States.